All right, listeners, buckle up, because today we're diving into something pretty crucial, the ethics of AI.
It's a hot topic for sure.
Yeah, and to really get into it, we're cracking open Chapter 18 of Inside the Ethics Wars, Humans versus Algorithms.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah.
It really gets into how different ethical frameworks, the ways we think about right and wrong, play out in both human brains and AI systems.
Exactly. So not just programming AI to be good, but actually figuring out what good even means in all these crazy situations AI is dealing with.
It's wild stuff. And it's relevant to, everyone, now that AI is making decisions that impact all of us every day.
Right. Not sci-fi anymore. So Chapter 18 starts off saying we need solid ethical frameworks now more than ever. Why the urgency? Why is it so crucial right now?
Because we're essentially asking AI to make moral judgments. Decisions that used to be made by humans.
Like what kinds of judgments?
Think about self-driving cars deciding who to protect in an accident, or algorithms choosing who gets a life-saving organ transplant.
Yeah, those aren't what-if situations anymore. They're happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about programming AI. It's about deciding what we're even programming it to do. What are its values going to be?
Okay, so it's getting philosophical. The book dives into a few of those ethical frameworks, right? Starting with utilitarianism, the one everyone seems to know. But what's the core idea there?
Utilitarianism, it's all about outcomes, like trying to maximize happiness for the most people. The greatest good for the greatest number, that's the classic line.
So a perfectly utilitarian AI would be constantly crunching numbers, weighing pros and cons to figure out the decision that leads to the most overall happiness.
You got it. Even if some individuals lose out in the process, it's about the big picture.
Sounds very logical and cold.
Which you'd think AI would be great at, right?
What?
All logic, no feelings.
Right. But isn't there a catch?
There is. The book highlights all this research showing that even humans, who are supposed to be all rational, don't always apply utilitarianism consistently in real life.
Wait, really? I thought utilitarianism was about cold, hard logic. What messes things up?
Our emotions, feelings, and gut reactions get in the way of pure logic, even when we think we're being rational.
So we're not as Spock-like as we like to believe.
Nope. The book uses the trolley problem as an example. That classic thought experiment where you have to choose between sacrificing one person to save 5 others. Tough, right?
Incredibly tough.
Yeah. And studies show that people really struggle to make a purely utilitarian decision when they can actually picture the people involved.
It's different when it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Huge difference. Imagining a real person getting hurt, even if it theoretically saves more lives, it messes with our heads.
Our empathy gets in the way of the calculation. So if humans can't even get utilitarianism right consistently, how do we expect to program an AI to do it?
That's the million-dollar question. Are we asking AI to be more ethical than we are?
Okay, so utilitarianism is about outcomes, but there are other ways to approach these ethical dilemmas, right? What about deontology? That's all about following the rules. Yeah.
Exactly. Deontology is like having a rule book for ethical behavior. Things like don't lie, don't steal, don't kill. No matter what the consequences are, you stick to those rules.
So a deontological AI would basically have this set of unbreakable rules programmed in and would just follow them blindly, even if it led to a bad outcome in a specific situation.
That's the idea, yes. And the book points out that, interestingly, studies show people are actually more consistent when they're applying deontological rules.
Even when things get messy, like in the business world.
Even then. It's like having those clear guidelines takes away some of the emotional back and forth we were talking about with utilitarianism. Less agonizing over what to do.
That makes sense. But I can see where that could cause problems too, right? What if you have to lie to protect someone from harm? A strictly rule-following AI wouldn't be able to make that call, would it?
Exactly. That's the dilemma with deontology. Consistency is great, but that rigidity can backfire.
Yeah, I can see that. Imagine a self-driving car that refuses to swerve to avoid an obstacle because it's programmed to never harm its passenger, even if swerving would save a bunch of pedestrians.
Yikes. Yeah, that's a tough one. Makes you wonder if any system based purely on rules, without some flexibility,
can ever really be ethical? Like maybe you need some judgment built in there too.
big questions, and ones we're only starting to grapple with as AI gets more powerful.
So we've got utilitarianism, which is all about the consequences, and deontology, which is about following the rules. What other ethical frameworks does the book dive into?
Well, there's virtue ethics, which is a different beast altogether. It shifts the focus away from actions and outcomes and puts it on the person, or I guess the AI in this case, making the choice.
So instead of what should I do or what will happen if I do this, it's more like what kind of person or AI should I be?
Bingo. It's about character. Aristotle is the big thinker here. Virtue ethics is all about developing good moral character, cultivating things like honesty, courage, compassion, fairness,
Like having a good heart.
basically. The idea is that if you're a good person, you'll naturally make good choices. You won't need a rule book because you'll just know.
It's like an inner compass guiding you. I know people like that. They don't necessarily follow a strict set of rules, but they're just good people. They consistently make choices that feel right.
Exactly. And Inside the Ethics Wars actually highlights research showing that people who work on these virtues, they do make more consistently ethical choices. It's like building a moral muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, but what happens when those virtues conflict? Like, what if you have to choose between being honest and being kind? Which one wins?
That's the tricky part. Virtue ethics is less black and white than other frameworks.
Yeah, how do you program that into AI? How do you teach a machine to have a good heart?
Right. It gets pretty complex. But it's a question worth asking. So we've got outcomes, rules, character. What's the last one we need to unpack?
Yeah, what else is there?
Well, there's care ethics, which comes from a different perspective. It's rooted in feminist philosophy, and it really emphasizes relationships, empathy, understanding the whole context of a situation.
So it's less about abstract principles and more about the actual people involved and their needs?
Precisely. The book uses healthcare as a good example. If you have a purely rule-based approach to medicine, you might miss crucial details about a specific patient.
Yeah, every person is different.
Exactly. And care ethics says you got to consider those differences. Make decisions that prioritize caring for others.
I like that. Recognizing that every situation is unique, there isn't always a perfect solution that applies to everyone. But couldn't that also lead to inconsistencies? Like, what if you're making a decision that affects a huge group of people with different needs? Whose needs do you prioritize?
You're right, that is a problem. Care ethics can be hard to apply on a large scale. And how do you even begin to teach a machine to understand all that context and nuance? It's a lot.
It's like you'd need to build an AI therapist or something. Okay, so we've got these 4 ethical frameworks, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. But where does AI actually fit into all of this? Isn't that the whole point of the book? Humans versus algorithms.
That's where it gets really interesting. The big question the book asks is this: can we actually program these complex ethical frameworks into AI systems? And if so, how?
And maybe even more importantly, should we? Like, we've just seen that humans struggle to apply these frameworks perfectly. We're biased, we're emotional.
Right, we're messy.
So how do we ensure that the AI we create isn't just reflecting our own flawed morals back at us?
Big, big question. And the book highlights this tension perfectly. On the one hand, algorithms are great at applying rules consistently, which could be really useful in certain situations. Think about using AI to make judicial decisions. The book actually talks about a study where an AI sentencing system was more consistent than human judges.
Whoa, that's kind of scary, but also kind of amazing.
Right. But then, could an AI ever really understand all the subtleties of a legal case and make a judgment that considers things like someone's background or the circumstances of a crime?
Things that might make you want to show a little mercy.
Yeah, exactly. You need human empathy and understanding for that, arguably. Algorithms might be better at consistency, but humans are better at flexibility, at least for now.
So what does that mean for the future? Can we create a system that combines the best of both?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance.
This has been fascinating, but I'm really curious to hear about how these ethical dilemmas play out in the real world, like with actual AI making decisions right now.
Well, you're in luck, because next time, we're diving into specific examples of AI making those tough calls in fields like healthcare, self-driving cars, even the military.
Buckle up, folks. This is where things get really interesting.
Welcome back, folks. Time to get practical. Let's see how these ethical frameworks actually play out in the real world.
Love it. It's one thing to talk philosophy, but seeing how it applies to actual AI decisions, that's where it gets real.
Totally. Let's start with healthcare. AI is making waves in organ transplantation, which is...
Oh, yeah. Ethically charged, for sure.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Never enough organs for everyone who needs them, so how do you decide who gets priority?
Life and death stuff.
Exactly. Traditionally, it's been human committees making those decisions, weighing things like medical urgency, compatibility.
I can already see how human biases could creep in there.
Oh, absolutely. Even unconsciously.
Yeah.
And that's where AI is starting to step in. Researchers are developing algorithms that can assess patients based on a set of criteria, trying to make it more objective.
So taking the human element and all its messiness, OUT of the equation, let a machine decide.
That's the goal, at least in part.
Hmm.
But, of course, it raises questions about
Who decides what those criteria are?
Exactly. Even algorithms are designed by humans, right? So those human values are still baked in. Inside the Ethics Wars talks about a real-world system that uses an algorithm to match kidneys to recipients.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the thinking behind that? What ethical framework is it using?
Well, it's a bit of a hybrid. It combines utilitarianism with fairness. So it prioritizes patients who are likely to benefit most from the transplant and who have a longer life expectancy.
That's the utilitarian part, making the most of a limited resource. But is it fair to automatically prioritize someone younger over someone older, even if they both have a good chance?
That's the ethical debate. And the system tries to address that by incorporating a fairness element. It uses a point system for things like time on the waiting list, medical urgency, and then a lottery for people with similar scores.
So it's not JST, cold, hard calculations.
Right, trying to balance things out, acknowledging that fairness matters too. It's messy, but it's a start.
Makes you think. Okay, let's shift gears to autonomous vehicles. Those seem like a breeding ground for ethical dilemmas.
Oh, big time. The book uses a pretty vivid example. Imagine a self-driving car cruising along, and suddenly a child runs out into the street. No time to brake. The car has to decide. Swerve and risk hitting a wall, injuring the passenger. Or stay on course and hit the child.
Gosh, that's awful. How do you even program a car to make that choice?
That's the nightmare scenario, right? And it highlights how hard it is to program morality into machines. A purely utilitarian AI might calculate that hitting the child causes less overall harm.
But what if the passenger is also a child? Or a group of people versus one person? How do you even begin to factor that in?
Exactly. It gets murky fast. And what about the rights of the passenger? That's where utilitarianism can fall short.
It's just lose-lose.
It is. Inside the Ethics Wars actually talks about the MIT Moral Machine Project. They're trying to tackle this head on.
I've heard of that. Remind me how it works.
Well, it's an online platform where people from all over the world can participate in these surveys about moral dilemmas involving autonomous vehicles.
Like, what would you do in situation X?
Yep. And they're gathering all this data to see if there are any universal principles that emerge. Like, are there some things humans generally agree on ethically?
Kind of like crowdsourcing morality to train AI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating and a little bit terrifying.
It is. Okay, we've talked healthcare, self-driving cars. What about the business world? Does AI even come up in ethical discussions there?
You might be surprised. Inside the Ethics Wars dedicates a whole section to it. There's a growing movement for businesses to operate more ethically and sustainably, and AI is part of that.
So like eco-friendly AI?
That's one aspect, but think about things like ethical investing.
Oh yeah, investing with a conscience.
Exactly. More and more investors want their money to align with their values, and there are now platforms that use AI to analyze companies based on things like their environmental impact, social responsibility.
So you could use AI to screen out companies that are, say, polluting like crazy or exploiting their workers.
Precisely. Or to find companies that are doing good, promoting diversity, being fair to their employees.
Putting your money where your mouth is, textile.
That's the idea. The book talks about how AI can be used for corporate governance, too.
We touched on that briefly, but what are some examples of AI promoting ethical behavior within companies?
Well, one example is using AI to detect fraud. It can analyze huge amounts of data to spot patterns that might indicate fishy business.
Makes sense. What about more subtle stuff like discrimination or harassment? Can AI help with that?
It can. AI can analyze company communications, like emails and chat logs, to find patterns that might suggest, say, sexist language or bullying.
So it's like having an AI HR department always watching. That feels kind of Big Brother-ish.
It does raise privacy concerns, for sure. The book talks about how important transparency and consent are in those situations. Employees should know what's happening.
Right, got to have those safeguards in place. Okay, so AI is popping up in all these unexpected corners of the ethical landscape. But there's one area that I think raises the biggest questions of all.
You're talking about the military, right?
Yeah, AI in warfare.
Autonomous weapons systems, or AWS.
Yeah.
It's one of the most controversial applications of AI, and the book really digs into it.
Machines making life or death decisions on the battlefield. It's kind of terrifying.
Totally. The ethical implications are huge. One of the biggest questions the book raises is accountability. If an AWS malfunctions, makes a mistake, harms civilians. Who's responsible? The programmer, the commander who deployed it, the machine.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Where do you even begin to assign blame?
Right. And that's why a lot of experts are calling for a ban on fully autonomous weapon systems. Humans should be in control, they argue, when it comes to lethal force.
I can see their point. But aren't there arguments in favor of AWS too? Like, aren't machines supposed to be less emotional? Maybe they'd be more ethical in war than humans who get caught up in anger, revenge.
That's a common argument, and the book acknowledges it. Proponents of AWS say they could actually reduce civilian casualties because they'd make more precise, calculated decisions. And they could protect soldiers by taking on the most dangerous missions.
So it's a classic utilitarian argument, right? Minimize overall harm.
Exactly. But the book pushes us to think beyond just that. What are the long-term consequences of giving machines that power over life and death?
Yeah. What if they fall into the wrong hands?
Exactly. Or what if they're used to justify unethical actions? We need to think long and hard about this.
No easy answers there.
Definitely not. Inside the Ethics Wars doesn't pretend to have them,
Mm-hmm.
but it does give us a framework for thinking about it and
Mm.
for having that conversation, which is crucial.
I like that. It's not just offering solutions, it's getting us to ask Kay the right questions.
That's what's so important.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Healthcare, transportation, finance, even war. AI is touching everything.
It is, and as it keeps evolving, the ethical challenges are just going to multiply.
So what do we do?
The book argues that we have to be proactive. Engage with these dilemmas head on, learn about these frameworks, and really think about what values we want AI to reflect.
We can't just sit back and let it happen. We have to shape this technology intentionally.
Exactly. If we don't, it'll shape us. And
Mhm.
that's a thought that should keep us all up at night.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent this episode exploring these big ethical frameworks: utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, care ethics. Whew, it's a lot to take in. Each one gives us a different way to look at moral dilemmas, right?
Yeah, totally. Like different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to figuring out how we decide what's right and wrong.
Exactly. But as we've seen, trying to actually program those frameworks into AI, that adds a whole other level of difficulty.
AI is making us think about ethics in a way. Well, we haven't really had to before.
Because even WE don't always agree on what's the best way to be ethical or how to be consistent with it. So how can we expect to teach machines to do it?
Right. It's almost like, are we trying to make AI better at ethics than we are?
It's a good question. And Inside the Ethics Wars actually suggests that this challenge is also a huge opportunity.
Oh, how so?
Well, tell me more about that.
Okay, so think about it. AI is getting more and more advanced all the time.
Right.
It's being used everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Practically every part of our lives at this point.
Exactly. And as AI gets more capable, it's going to have to make more decisions. And some of those decisions, they're going to have moral implications.
We've been talking about them all episode. Healthcare decisions, self-driving cars, financial stuff, even decisions about war. It's not the future anymore. It's
Right.
now.
Right. So if we don't actively try to shape the ethical frameworks that AI uses, it's going to develop its own sort of moral compass, you could say,
Mm-hmm.
based on the data it's given and the goals we program into it.
And that could go wrong in a lot of ways, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Imagine an AI that's designed to be super efficient in a hospital, but it doesn't have a good understanding of fairness.
Oh, no.
It might start prioritizing some patients over others based on things like how old they are, how much money they make, even under their zip code, things that shouldn't matter.
It's like the algorithm could make existing inequalities even worse if we're not incredibly careful.
That's the risk, yeah.
Hmm.
But Inside the Ethics Wars makes a good point. We can use these ethical frameworks to be proactive.
Instead of just reacting to problems after they happen.
Right. Anticipate them. Design systems that are less likely to make decisions that we consider morally wrong.
I mean, it's not like we can predict every situation.
Of course not. But we can build in safeguards. Try to think about potential problems. It's a shift in thinking.
From reactive to proactive. I like that. But it won't be easy, will it?
Not at all. There's going to be tons of debate about which ethical framework is the right one and trying to translate those ideas into actual code.
Yeah, that's a whole other challenge. Plus, even if we do manage to perfectly align AI with our current values, what if our values change?
Oh, yeah. That's another layer. Think about how much our ideas about, say, slavery or women's rights have changed over time.
Yeah.
What's ethical today might be unthinkable tomorrow.
That's true. So it's not a set it and forget it situation. We need to be constantly reevaluating these systems.
100%. It's an ongoing process. And it's not just about programmers and tech people. It's about, well, everyone. We all need to be part of this conversation.
Ethicists, philosophers, computer scientists, everyone. This is way bigger than just tech, isn't it?
Totally. It's a societal issue.
Well, this deep dive has given me a lot to think about. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I guess what I'd say is this. The future of ethical decision-making. It's not just about algorithms. It's about us. The choices we make every day, the things we value, even the conversations we have. It all matters. So be informed, be engaged, and be thoughtful. The future really is in our hands.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for this incredible discussion, and to all of you listening. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring these ideas, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you next time.